What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo channel, talking some college football DFS. Maction continues. It is night 2, Wednesday, November the 3rd. We had an interesting slate last night. Akron changed their starting quarterback on us, as they have done multiple times this year. Took a large bet on Miami, Ohio, minus 6.5 against Ohio. They lose outright. So, as usual, it has been off to a chaotic start, but that is why we are here with Awesemo, giving you everything you need to know about some of these games. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. Tonight, we have a 2-game slate, and we are going to take you behind the glass, showing you our player usage data tool. We also have projections, ownership projections, everything you need for these slates. But diving into the 2-game slate, there's a lot to talk about here. We have a nice rivalry game to kick things off between Central Michigan and Western Michigan. The spread is 10 points in favor of Western Michigan. The total, it has been soaring. This opened around 62. I was lucky enough to hit the over at that number, but I've seen it get as high as 66 in some spots. So there's a lot of points expected to be scored. On offense, both teams are extremely fast, well above average in terms of pace. And then you have a little bit of a differing approach in terms of pass rate. Central Michigan is very, very pass heavy, 56% of the time, whereas Western Michigan is passing slightly below average. They're coming in at 43.5% of the time. Looking at Central Michigan first, the underdog. Daniel Richardson has usurped Jacob Sermon, the transfer, as far as starting quarterback goes. Richardson, he's not the most mobile, -8 rushing yards on the year. But overall, this is a very pass-heavy team, and it has led to a lot of situations where you have a ceiling for these guys. Richardson comes in at just 5,600. There is a little bit of job security issues with Central Michigan, and I want to highlight some of the places where there is job security based on what happened with Akron last night. Sermon might play a little bit in this game, but overall, on the range of, like a clear starter to just a pure rotation, Richardson is closer to clear starter at this point. He's played very well, albeit against some of the easier competition. Sermon really got beat up in non-con. But overall, Western Michigan's going to play good defense here, which is why he's just a little bit below some of the other signal colors on this slate. But Richardson, he is middling to above average job security, and with such an elite total in the game, he needs to be considered on a 2-game slate. In the run game, Lou Nichols is the clear preferred back. In some of these spots, you have to just take the points, the carries, the touches when you can get them, and Lou Nichols is one of these guys. He is averaging 25.3 touches per game, extremely active in the pass game, where he has at least 8 targets in back-to-back games. Regardless of game script, Lou Nichols is very active here. Behind him, you were going to see Miles Bailey play a change of pace role. Darius Bracey is expected to return too, but with how well Nichols has played, he should be the bell cow back. In the receiving game, Jakorie Sullivan returned to action in Central Michigan's most recent game, saw 8 targets. He led the team in targets, actually, and Jakorie Sullivan is basically going to function in a timeshare with Khalil Pimpleton as kind of the 1A, 1B. That's going to alternate back and forth between these guys, the 2 leading receivers for this team, and very clearly so. Dallas Dixon saw his snaps drop a little bit when Jakorie Sullivan returned, and that's what we're going to expect moving forward. It's Pimpleton, it's Sullivan as the top 2 options. Dallas Dixon is the wide receiver 3, who's not going to see quite as many looks, but you can definitely get to these guys. The tight end is Joel Wilson. He's cheap enough at 3,900 where he's worth a look. A lot of his higher target games came earlier in the season, but he still saw 6 in their last game, even with Sullivan back. So he's a punt play you can look to in tournaments. On the Western side, we have Caleb Elliebee as the starting quarterback, and he has a lot of job security. Very secure here with Elliebee. He's not the most mobile, just 30 yards on the ground, which is a little bit troublesome because they do run the ball so much. You wish Elliebee was at least involved. But he has been very efficient, and Western Michigan runs so many plays that it doesn't necessarily matter that they're a run-first team. He's still averaging nearly 30 attempts per game, just shy of 250 yards. Clear upside here, and Central Michigan allows over 300 yards to opposing passers. So Elliebee, he's a very safe play. Maybe the ceiling isn't as high as some other players, but overall with their total, I think that's something you could argue too, that he has a very high ceiling. So Elliebee is somebody I think that's a very good cash play, very secure with the job. In the run game, Western uses a timeshare. It's Ladarius Jefferson, the Michigan State transfer. It's Sean Tyler, and it's Jackson Kincaid. Overall, Ladarius Jefferson's the leader in terms of opportunity this year, and he averages 17.4. But recently, that's become closer to a 50-50 timeshare with Sean Tyler than a lot of people might believe. And overall, Tyler's the preferred pass catching back. He has 15 targets, to Ladarius Jefferson with 5. So Tyler appears more and more involved of late. That is reflected in the price on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, Ladarius Jefferson is still more expensive. Tyler, cheaper over there, a better play. And Kincaid is basically just going to be your change of pace guy. He's averaging 5.3 touches per game, but that's increased in the last 2 games. Just a GPP play worth maybe throwing a dart on, but ultimately I don't think you need it. In the receiving game, the alpha receiver is Sky Moore. He's averaging over 10 targets per game and over 100 yards per game on the year, and that's increased in their last 4, where he's up to 11.8 targets. Sky Moore is just so involved that he's a priority. If you cannot get to him for whatever reason, Jalen Hall is also a very good option, averaging 5.8 targets per game, but he has recently worked ahead of Corey Crooms. You can see Corey Crooms has not been targeted in either of Western Michigan's last 2 games, but he's been active. He was on the field for those 2 contests, which means Jalen Hall might have just simply usurped him as the wide receiver too. Again, a fluid situation, but willing to take a stab on Hall at 5,400, assuming he's begun to work ahead of Crooms, who again has been active but just not targeted over the last 2 games. He still has been running as the wide receiver 3, so it's a very good buy low spot on Crooms if you think he is still very active in this offense. From there, Anthony Torres is somebody maybe you look to as a dart throw, but I don't think you need to get to that cheap on this slate at the tight end position for Western. Game number 2. We have Northern Illinois taking on Kent State, and believe it or not, this game still has the better total overall. It comes from a lot of lapses on defense, which we'll get to, but Northern Illinois enters this game as a 5-point underdog. The total is 67. Northern Illinois is about average in terms of pace, and they're very, very run heavy, 32% pass rate. Conversely, Kent State's going to play at extremely fast pace, nearly 80 plays per game, a 43% pass rate, which is actually very similar to Western Michigan. Looking at the Northern Illinois team, first of all, Rocky Lombardi comes over as a transfer from Michigan State. He's been extremely mobile here, much, much different than what we've seen out of him in the past. 324 yards on the ground. They are using him as a rusher. Now, he does not have a ton of upside through the air, just 165 yards per game, only 21 and a half attempts for Lombardi, but still that rushing floor is very nice here, and they have a solid team total. He also has job security. There hasn't been another quarterback that's played a snap this year. In the run game, we have a lot of injuries to monitor, and there's been some reports that Harrison Whaley is going to miss this game. I have not seen an updated depth chart, and believe me, I've looked. So if you find one, let me know. But right now, Harrison Whaley has missed the last 3 games. They just had their bye, and I have him projected to play in the projections. However, this is extremely volatile. There has been no update on his status. So just know that there is a very, very strong chance that Whaley does not play. Whaley's the leader when active, but he's dealing with an arm injury. No idea if Whaley will be out there. There is also an injury to Ontario Brown, who was the preferred backup to Whaley before he got injured himself. He is also questionable. Either way, Jevion Ducker has been the player that stepped up, and he's been so efficient in his time on the field that I'm not sure he gives the work back either way. I think if Whaley's active, it's a timeshare. But if Brown is active and Whaley is not, I think it's still just Ducker because of how good he's played. Ducker's had at least 31 carries in back-to-back games. He's not very active as a pass catcher. In fact, he hasn't been targeted a single time. But Northern Illinois' run rate is so high that Ducker is still a pretty good play here. Again, Ducker's an elite play if we miss both Brown and Whaley. He's still a very good play if Brown is active, but Whaley is not. And then if Whaley is in, I think this is closer to a timeshare between Whaley himself and Ducker. In the receiving game, Tyrese Ritchie's been the clear alpha receiver, averaging 9 targets per game over the last 4. A lot of it inefficient, 60 yards per game, but he's still seeing an immense target volume. The one wrinkle here is that Cole Tucker might return from injury, another player that's been questionable. He averaged 4 targets per game and 51.5 yards prior to injury, just a focal piece of the offense when healthy. If he plays, I think it hurts Trayvon Rudolph, who has played a lot more recently. He has 9 targets in the last 2 games, but his routes have been dropping a little bit as they play with a lot of 2 tight end sets here. But overall, if Cole Tucker is active, I think it mainly hurts Trayvon Rudolph. If Cole Tucker is out, Rudolph becomes somebody you can still play. But either way, Tyrese Ritchie's the number 1. In the receiving game behind them, you're looking at a team that uses a lot of tight ends, Tristan Twos, Miles Joyner, Liam Sorgan. Those guys are all just pure darts, probably not worthwhile with some other better cheap plays in the slate. Last team, Kent State, huge favorites here. Oh, before we move on, Kent State's defense, allowing 214 rushing yards, 290 pass yards per game. Northern Illinois should be able to score. All right, for real, Kent State. Dustin Crum is the best quarterback play on the slate, and it's not really close. He has elite job security. He has elite volume. He's very efficient, and he's a very strong dual threat with 368 yards on the ground this year. Crum is just somebody that you need to play, I think, in cash games and tournaments. You can get outside of him in large field tournaments, but in small field and cash games, he's the best quarterback play on the slate. And Northern Illinois has not been good on defense. They're allowing nearly 250 passing and 195 rushing, which Crum also exploits because he's very mobile. In the run game, it has been a two-way committee for the most part between Marquez Cooper and Xavier Williams. It's been about a 65-35 split somewhere in there, with Cooper being a lot more active overall, averaging 16 touches per game, but Williams is still in play. He's averaging 10.3 touches himself. Williams would be the cheap play if you can't get up to Cooper, but both are fine plays. And again, Northern Illinois allows nearly 200 rushing yards per game. In the receiving room, Dante Cephus is a pure alpha receiver. He's averaging 85, nearly 86 receiving yards per game on 9.1 targets, which is even increased of late, where he averages 11 targets in their last 4 games. So Dante Cephus, a great play. As for cheaper receivers, you can't do much better than Nykeem Johnson. The transfer from Syracuse, he's averaging over 50 yards per game, over 6 targets. That's a lot of really cheap volume for Nykeem Johnson. From there, Keyshawn Abram is the clear wide receiver 3. He's averaging 5.3 targets per game in Kent State's last 4 games, but that's been very narrow. He hasn't been above 6 targets. He hasn't received less than 5. So very clear opportunity with not as much of a ceiling. And then Kent State runs a ton of 4 wide sets. So Jayshawn Polk is the clear wide receiver 4, and he's on the field about 50% of the snaps. Target volume from him has been depressed, just 3.3 targets per game over their last 4. But he's going to be on the field a lot if you just need a pure punt play at 3,100. He's the preferred ultimate, just cheap guy on the slate. Maybe you get to like Luke Floria in pure GPP situations, but overall, I don't think you need to do it. You can just play the very cheap guy in Jayshawn Polk and move on. But that'll do it for us today. Again, welcome to the volatility of the MAC. Appreciate you guys sticking with us. We have projections, everything you need at Awesemo. They will be updated throughout the day. I am Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Let me know in the comments your favorite play. Hit the thumbs up button on the way out, and we will see you again later this week. Thank you guys. Have a good day.